welcome back. Can you believe it? It has been already a year since Giorgio and I kicked off this entrepreneurial journey. To celebrate, today we are doing something special. With the help of our good friend Mauro Foresti, we are turning the mic around to interview one of the most important guests we could ever have, Giorgio himself. In this episode, he opens up about his childhood, his struggles with the education system, and how those challenges shaped him into the person he is today.
I'm Mauro Foresti.
I'm Ivan Peña, and this is Bootstrap for Cash. Good morning, Mauro. How are you doing today?
Pretty good, Ivan. Thanks for having me back on your podcast.
Thank you for taking your time as usual, right? You are becoming a professional already.
I wish.
You actually bought already microphones, right?
Yes, I ordered them. Let's see when they get here.
Nice. People might wonder why we have Mauro here today and not Giorgio. Actually, Giorgio is here, so he's not on vacation. We don't have that luxury. But today is a special episode. It has been already 1 year since we started C Lambda, not the podcast. The podcast has some months, but when we started our entrepreneurial journey, it was already around 1 year. So we decided to do some special episodes about Giorgio, and another one will be about me in the future. And so, yeah, you guys get to know us better. So let's start with Giorgio. Hi, Giorgio. How are you doing today?
Good. Thank you for having me, I guess. I'm a guest in my own podcast.
Are you nervous?
Not really, no.
Are you ready to talk about yourself? Should be easy, I guess.
I come prepared. I studied.
You studied.
You better.
You read a book, right? So let's start with who's Giorgio Azzinato in your own words?
It's tough. Yes, many things, but well, it's a bit stereotypical, I would say, since this is what we do. But mostly, I'm a problem solver. I like to, when I see something that doesn't work somehow, that it's inefficient, that is not working as it should, I like to jump in and try to figure out a solution, which I guess has a lot to do with, as we said, what we do as our job.
But you just described a generic engineer, right? So get a bit deeper. Try to get a bit deeper. Who's Giorgio Azzinato? Like the person, not just the professional.
Yeah, exactly. That's why I said that's a bit stereotypical, but it's the baseline. Other things I'm also a sailor, which is, well, I think which also defines quite a bit also who I am and how I act.
In one way?
Well, I mean, there is a lot of preparation and technique and collaboration that goes into doing an apparently simple activity that, however, it can turn bad very easily. It's something that could easily get you or others hurt. So it's something that trickles down in life somehow. It's something that you learned there on the water. It's something that trickles down in life. Being able to collaborate with others, to coordinate work among others, so that you come prepared when shit hits the fan. You don't have to risk it, and you've got a backup plan. That's something that also defines a bit my work. Not so much now, but for a good chunk of also my work in software, I've been doing site reliability and infrastructure, and that's also something that, as a mindset, you always need to be one step ahead. So it's not that you're a pessimist per se, but you just need to think about, okay, what's gonna happen next?
Mm-hmm.
What is more likely to happen, and how do I come prepared? So constantly looking ahead. That's also a bit where I'm always trying to think what's gonna happen next and various options and evaluate them and try to look at the data and the statistics and figure out how to move ahead. So
that sounds a bit like overthinking, right? And I guess when shit really hits the fan on a boat, especially when you are in charge of different people, which you are, by the way, as your current income is based on that, right? You teach other people to sail.
My most profitable business is as a sailing instructor now.
So I guess all this analysis that you're describing, you cannot do that when shit hits the fan. So how do you handle that? Especially considering that you are an engineer and we tend to overthink everything, right?
Yes, it's true that we also tend to do that here, but it's that's why it all comes in the preparation, and I think it can also work in our job to address it in a similar way. The idea is you train all the time. I think it's the same also as like airplane pilots do. You train all the time and think about all the worst case scenarios so that when they hit, you don't have to think at all.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, there must be a balance. So the balance is, it's not that you think about the worst case scenarios and then you don't do shit. I think that's the difference. In our case, is like spending too much time designing software and then never actually implementing anything at all. Because you think about all the possible things that could happen, all the possible things that you may need to implement, then you end up implementing nothing because you get into analysis paralysis.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, it doesn't help. In a similar way, actually, you see it often also in, at least with sailors. You see all the possible things that could go bad, and you see, I don't know, maybe that day is too windy, or it's about to rain, and you constantly do nothing. It's like, how to put it right? There are cases, of course. So it's very much about knowing what you can and cannot do, and pushing always just a little bit further.
Mm-hmm.
So I know today it doesn't make sense that we try and take over, I don't know, take any huge company with infinite amount of money. It doesn't make sense that you try and get there. Not today. We're not ready yet. At the same time, we shouldn't be doing nothing at all, not even trying to push a bit further and learn a bit more and make small steps towards that, because one day we could be there. And I think it's a matter of balancing those two things. So you have an objective, maybe a very high objective. You cannot get there today, but you start training and preparing, but you take small steps. So you still need to go out and get in the water. You need to get wet. You need to make some mistakes, but they need to make some controlled mistakes. You can't stop there just thinking and studying. You can't spend all your time in the books and never test what you learned reading books. At the same time, you cannot be an idiot and just go and get killed in some cases, or go and get your company bankrupt if you try and achieve crazy things when you're still a small fish. So it's also sometimes it's a lesson in humility. So you need to know where you need to stop, but sometimes you also need to push a bit further. So yes, training, preparing, studying, it is important also for us, but it is also important to then put that into practice.
Mm-hmm.
So studying a lot and then seeing that in action, also when it's tough.
It's also to get experience. I mean, it's like you can calculate what happens if the wind changes, but when the wind changes, there are so many variables that you cannot account for, that you need to be able to react properly. And sometimes certain things you just learn it when you're in the field, you know.
It's the only way, yes, to burn that into your brain. You need to see it in action. And I can actually tell you the reason why I learned to sail, because I was scared as fuck when I was a kid. I was really horrified by boats. I was afraid I was going to sink or I was going to capsize. And so you start pushing a bit and a bit and a bit further, and you learn what you can do. And that's how you build up that experience and say, oh, okay, so this is what happens then.
So to put it in simple words to my question, Giorgio Azzinaro is a masochist.
You could say that.
Yeah. I mean, I always wondered. I mean, even by hearing you talking right now, I mean, let's think you're in your 20s still. And also, like, when I got to know you, it's like many years ago, so it was really early 20s, and everybody had the feeling that you were older, because you also got married pretty young, and even for us, for my generation, and even Ivan's generation, it's quite early. So it's and when you talk and so forth, you have the feeling. I mean, everyone's got the feeling that you're older. So why are you like that? And what's your opinion? Have you always been like that? Have you born like with that mindset? Have you been born like that mindset, or
with a book?
What is it? It's like I don't know.
My siblings used to joke when I was like, I don't know, 5, that I would eat a page of the dictionary a day because I would know about some random or a page of encyclopedia, I think, a day, because I would come up with some random facts I learned or some random word I learned. So they always mocked me for that. But also with school, I skipped my first year of school.
Mm-hmm.
Like I jumped straight into second grade because somehow again at age 5 or so, I knew how to read and I think I knew how to write as well, because that's what you learn in the first year of school. So they just, I remember I did this, felt like it was a stupid exam to me, but somehow I learned that, well, teachers were not so sure I could do that somehow. So yeah, I did this exam when I was 5. Then yeah, they actually let me skip first year of school. Then what else? Well, at some point I also I dropped out of high school. I went straight to college. That's maybe for later. And yeah, I started university earlier due to that as well. I guess, I mean, it kind of happened. It kind of happened. Just lots of things happening one after the other. And it was always like that.
Mm-hmm.
I never thought much of it, to be honest. It was just how it was.
And when did you discover your passion for tech?
I think in another episode I mentioned I started programming when I was around 9, 10, something like that. Passion was even earlier than that. Like I loved disassembling things, looking at how things worked. Since earlier on, I remember having a computer at home since forever. Like as far as I can remember, there was always a computer at home, so I always tinkered with that. So it was always obvious for me. It was a big passion.
Mm-hmm.
Although there was a point during, say, maybe beginning of high school, I was a bit fed up with it. I didn't see much value in it. So there was a point in which I was saying, no way I'm ever working in this shit. It's just, yeah, it's fun from time to time, but I was kind of tired of it and fed up. At some point, I was kind of abandoning it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you said before, and this is always meant to ask you back also in the days, but never really came into my mind when I was face to face with you or on the phone. I mean, you said before that you dropped out of school in high school, and then you went to college before, and now how come did you go to Edinburgh? I mean, because
Okay.
one thing is going to university before, and another thing is not going to your country for university, but even leaving the country. Was it like even, I mean, it also points to the question why you left high school. It's because you got bored or anything? And were you also bored maybe of the country? And you said, I needed something more challenging?
Yeah, it's a mix of things. It's a mix of things, and a messy story that, again, it kind of turned out the way it was, but you couldn't say that I made plans for it. It's not like I had it 100% figured out. Also, back then, it was one of those cases where I had an idea of the various options I had, but again, I couldn't overthink it because I knew I couldn't 100% know what was going to happen. So I kind of went along with that and took it as a learning experience. So yes, it was a mix of things. So the trigger was definitely I was no longer fitting in at school. I felt like it was absolutely not challenging, and felt like I was wasting time somehow. I say yes, I was.
What didn't you find challenging?
Well, I always felt like I was not really learning any new skills. I felt like a zombie day to day, and at some point I was like, okay, so what's the point here? I couldn't see what I was doing next if I kept doing what I was doing. So I was considering all of my options. And I thought, okay, let's see what other options I have. And this idea of going to Scotland was just because I learned, random fact, as I like to learn random things, that I would technically be of age in Scotland. It's one of the few countries in the world where I could just move to at 16 and nobody could say shit.
Nice.
So that was like, okay, I know this thing now. It was a random fact that I learned. And I started putting more data together then and say, okay, well, what kind of opportunities could I have there? And I learned that education was completely free in Scotland for all anyone from the European Union. At least it was like that back then. I don't know now. So okay, it looks like they're doing some interesting stuff there. There were interesting universities and colleges doing more interesting things. And keep in mind, I mean, this was it was 11 years ago, so it was before Brexit. So the UK was also in a better shape. And it felt like there were many more opportunities than what I was doing there. So I thought, that maybe there are more interesting things that I could study. And maybe I can find something to do in the meantime just to, to survive. Yes, I think I can do that. I was already back then doing a bit of freelancing. I was doing a bit of some websites here and there. So I was back then into tech. So I thought, I think I can figure something out. I wrote to a college. They said they would take me into a course that was comparable to a high school course. So I just had to prove I had a good enough English, basically. That was their only requirement. Since I convinced them that I knew some stuff about software anyway, because that's what the course was all about. And so I just pulled the trigger and said, okay, fuck it, I'll do it. Let's see what happens. I had a crazy teacher I could never thank enough who helped me convince my parents.
So the teacher was from university or
no. My teacher in Italy.
Yeah.
She was two of them actually, but especially one. She was from New Zealand, and she was very supportive of that. She was just like convince my parents, saying, you know him, he's trustworthy. Just let him do that and fuck up if he needs to. So yeah, just went with that. Went to Edinburgh. Didn't know anyone at all. Did a couple of days in this college. At the same time, I was looking for a job. I did again a couple of websites. I managed to do a couple of websites just to pay like the first month of rent. With like random contacts I got from the internet. I looked up. Was it on Craigslist or don't remember the website, but yeah, found some random freelancing jobs. Got enough to pay first month of rent. Started school, and at that point I also found a proper job in again in software. Again, those people there I also couldn't thank enough. They kind of just trusted me with no resume or whatever. We just had a chat basically, and I proved I knew my shit. And 1 week later, I think they hired me. It was really just like that. At that point, then I started college. I did like maybe 2 days of lesson, maybe 1 week of lessons. I was already fed up again. I said, "Look, guys, I'm trying to keep things together. I'm trying to make me sense because I now have this job as a software engineer. I need that to survive. So obviously I need to do that. And these things we are doing at school, I feel like they're useless. So if you have a better course, like a higher level course, maybe I'll stick around. Otherwise, I think I'm just going to drop out."
Again.
Yeah. My question there, when when you're there and you say, I don't see where this is going, is it because you didn't see the meaning, or you already saw the meaning of the value that they were teaching and you already knew what they were teaching about?
Yeah. It was like the things we were talking about. I was already doing them, and again, probably at an even higher level. I was already working as a software engineer, and we were there talking about how to open a terminal, or how not to say bullshit in front of a customer. That was the kind of thing. It's like, I'm doing that by now. So, I got there with this idea because I didn't know about it. I got there with this idea I had from the outside that, this was going to be great. This school was going to be great. Then I saw the reality and I told them. And yeah, I convinced them again. And they also the professor there were like, okay, fair enough. We don't usually do it, but it seems you know your shit. It's true that I could speak English again back then, so okay, we'll just move you to the other course. and I really liked the attitude also, which is also why I sticked around there in Scotland. There, everybody was very, they just wanted to get shit done. They weren't bothered with any bullshit, with any certifications, with any formality. You just, okay, then next day, this is your new plan. Come to this course. and so I moved to that.
My question is also like, I see a pattern here, and the pattern is like, you did already things that they were teaching at school. So you were always a step ahead. And now, what is that step ahead? How do you reach that step ahead? Or basically, because either you figured out a pattern or you do it by inertia. Or is it interest? It's just because you had very clear your vision, and so you went on and you were curious about certain things, and so you were getting ahead. From your opinion, if you would like, because it's like you found the short path, right? Because usually I see, for example, for my kids, and when they go to school, it's like the school tries to explain you things by doing like approaching it like from a rounder way and not cutting straight to the chase, right? And I have the feeling you did that. you cut straight to the chase. And the question is, how do you, or what's your advice to younger generation? What's your advice to get straight to the point and be effective?
That's a good question. I feel like we could do probably an entire episode about all the shortcomings of education, at least what I could see as from my point of view. I think what we all see from our point of view, education at different levels across different countries, because I think all countries have got then all their mistakes they do. But yes, it's true that the way I try to do things, I try not to run in circles, which again doesn't going back to what we said in the beginning, doesn't mean not thinking ahead. It actually means that. It also means about looking at the concrete opportunities, what is more likely to happen or not, and then just act, actually do something. And you can still correct at some point, right? You can act and then decide that something was not right, and then take a step back, and that is also not a failure. It's just figuring out things. Whereas sometimes what you said before about inertia, it was also something I had considered back then. In fact, it was the consensus. When I left to go to Edinburgh, the consensus was, no, but why should you do that? Just have another couple of years of high school, and then you decide what to do. Then you'll figure it out. But why wait if I feel like I'm wasting those 2 years? I can already act. I can do something now. Worst case scenario, I can always change. I can change my mind again. It's as long as a decision is not final. There are very, very, very few things that are final. There are very few decisions that you make and say, okay, there is no way out of this. Very few. Everything else, it's like, who cares? Okay, I can try this thing. If it wasn't right, it's not even a failure. I can change my mind. I can do something else. And again, I did that later on when I spent some time in Scotland. Then I had some opportunities for university there. I figured it was not at that point, after having graduated a college there, I thought certain things about university here, but now that I learned more, I'm not sure this is the best path, so I'll try something else. And so I went back to Italy for university because I wanted to study physics. The way it was in the UK, at that point, it was kind of, at that point, I had to study software again at university. It had to be like that. It was like there were no other options. They put me into that track, and I had to stick to that. I thought, no, you know what? Actually, I'm already doing this, so I don't care as much about studying software. I don't care about becoming having a career in academia doing software. It's not what I like. I said I like solving real problems with software, but I also like to learn new things. So I thought maybe if I get other inputs, if I study other things, other subjects, I get more ideas. I get new things that I could work on. And I thought physics could be a good spot to do that. I thought I'm going to learn a lot about math. I'm going to learn a lot about applied math and different subjects that you could put together, knowing how, let's say, physics or anything around us works. And again, I sticked around enough there to also at some point get disillusioned with that and realized I wasn't learning anything of what I liked. I decided, this is not the right environment for me. And again, why waste time? I just said, okay, I can just act. I just keep on doing my work, what I like. So I don't waste time. I keep improving where I see improvements. Where I keep improving where I see some return. And I can always decide later what I want to do next. So, I never felt like that was a failure. I just felt like at any point in time, I would try out what was giving me the highest return. So if I'm testing different things and I see, okay, it works this way, it doesn't work that way, then I'll stick to this one. But if I'm working on something and it doesn't work that way, there is only so much you can. At some point, it's good to figure out, okay, wait a sec, this is not working. Let's try something else. And yeah, again, I think the way the school system works doesn't teach that skill. It's not made to work that way. But again, it will probably be its own episode to dive deeper into that, and probably need some somebody who's actually studying that stuff to have a say on it.
Can I ask you something off script, although it's going on record? Probably you will hate me for this question, but I'm fine with that. We talked about this topic in the past, and your reaction was quite against it, like quite negative. And actually, you were quite reactive to it. And I want to understand why. So the question is, at this point, after all what you talked about already, and or probably listeners, this is my personal perception. I talked about it with Mauro as well in private. Yes, we gossip. We gossip about you. It's clear that you have a high IQ, right? But you hate that. You hate the word IQ, because I guess, this is my assumption, is a way to categorize you, and you don't like that, I guess. But if that's the case, can you give me your impression about it? Why do you hate this category?
Well, first of all, I don't know if I have a high IQ.
I don't know either, but it's clear
because I hate those things. So
exactly.
I never subjected myself to that. So I may very well have a very low IQ, as far as I know, and I don't care. And yeah, I don't like categorizing people. I don't like to put people in a box, because I don't like. Wait, let's take a step back. I believe the school system is flawed, everything we said so far, because it tries to treat everyone the same, as if we all like the same things, as if we all learn the same way. I know that this is debated among, again, professional and academics, but it tries to treat everyone the same, except maybe this idea, that some people are smarter and some people are dumber. Like there is this simplification then of, no, everybody is the same. Everybody is absolutely the same, except some people are dumb, some people are smart.
Yeah, I totally agree with that point, because I mean, having, it's like I always had my mind, and now having children, looking at them and how they react and how they are in school, and as a parent, you really try to do the best for your child. And having two kids, it makes it easier, because you focus only on two kids, and let alone if you have just one kid. But if you have 10, then you cannot focus. You just whatever happens. But now having two kids, I see that you basically, the school, as you said, they just try to be like inclusive, like everyone at the same, prepare them all, give this baseline. But doing that, they basically shut off all those colors that the kids have. Each one individual has those colors, and for me, colors are those talents. And each one of us has a certain specific characteristic that fits her genetics, their genetic, because I think it's also based on genetics. Some things, some characteristics, and some of those characteristics that would basically flourish in a certain environment, that would just flourish and get bigger, and the person would also be happy with it, because in a certain way it fits your genetics, and so you do what your purpose is done for. It fits your being, because that's your characteristic. I'm sorry if I'm repeating myself, but it's just traits, and then you get the most out of the person, but not just in performance. You get the most out of the person because it fits the being of the person, and the person is even more in line with its own needs. Maybe I'm talking a bit philosophically, but I see it. And also when I see you right now, it's like, even when you talk about like you drop out of school and you wanted to try new things and stuff like that, it goes also in the direction of right now what you're doing with C Lambda. You know, maybe I'll ask you and say, so how do you feel that all this path that you had and dropping out and not finding things that work for you and so forth, how do you see any, let's say, parallels to what you're doing right now with C Lambda?
Yes, I think it does go hand in hand. Being able to experiment means you cannot be on a rail track. It's just the world is complex. The world is really complex, and people are complex. And it goes back to that. School and everything around it tries to dumb it down so much, that to simplify it so much. There is this tries to treat people again as monodimensional, like, oh, either you're dumb or smart, or again monodimensional. So somebody is a bit smarter than somebody else, and somebody is a bit dumber than somebody else. But the reality is there are so many dimensions that make up a person that it's impossible to compare. And again, the world is so complex and so many things can happen that I feel like it is the same when you're trying to do business. It's you cannot dumb it down to a series of steps to follow, because it doesn't work that way, because the world is more complex. Every situation is unique, is its own universe. So it is really vital then to be flexible and be willing to experiment, which means also opening up to, let's say, failure. Failure is an option when doing an experiment. So you don't get the outcome you were expecting. You say, okay, that's a failure. Yes, but it's a learning exercise. You did something, it doesn't work the way you expected, and you can then try something else. And again, I think it is important to do this repeatedly, as I think I did, because I did set myself up for failure in that sense multiple times. So when it happens, you don't get discouraged. It's just another experience. It's just another experiment that tells you, if you do this and then do that, and this happens. I tested my hypothesis. I can go on with something else. So I keep this sort of scientific approach in anything I do in my life, which again actually goes back to, let's say, one of the reasons why I left university. So I didn't see that there. This was supposedly a tenet of the scientific method is hardly relevant in what is actually an industry. And at that point, it's like, what's the point? The point, if you're not innovating, then what's the point of that?
You had a life before C Lambda, so let's dig into that. With such a profile that you started already with tech so young, how could you end up in consulting and afterwards in banking? I mean, I don't want to criticize people working there because I worked there for many years, but it's not the kind of thing. Let's be honest. Maybe this is more important for my podcast, but I ended up in banking, well, by mistake. It was quite random, but after so many years, what I realized is that you can make a lot of money with banking, but when it comes to challenges and being always on top of technology, like the latest stuff, playing with AI and all that, that's not the kind of thing that you pursue in banking. Banking is conservative for various reasons. One of them, security. So with such a profile, I would expect you to have pursued that career, but you ended up in banking and also consulting before that. Why that?
I think it's due to opportunities also that come up. So you can, of course, spend your whole life working after a specific objective. So if I had set myself the objective in 15 years ago to say, I don't know, I want 1 million by age 30, I would have done different things. Of course, I could have done different things. The easiest being staying longer in banking or working towards, I don't know, getting into Amazon. I could do different things. That could have been an objective, and then I followed that. But when it comes to challenges, I mean, you say, okay, looking for something, what does it mean, looking for something challenging? Would that have been challenging? Like, if I went and joined Amazon, there is this idea like that they are solving the craziest problem on earth. They tell you it's not true. It's not. I've seen enough also on that side. I know enough people there, or also other, or I could have set that as an objective to go and build rockets. There is also not the challenging thing that you can think of. It is, in fact, on the other end, a very structured path. It's the opposite of what I was advocating for 5 minutes ago. It's the opposite of that. So if you set off with the objective when you are 15 to work at the space agency, you can follow very specific steps to get in there. Or at CERN. I've got a bunch of friends now working at CERN. That's also seen as a very challenging thing to do. And it doesn't, I'm not saying any of this saying that they're doing a poor job or it's not the intention at all. They're doing very interesting, but also very useful things. They are. But I don't see it as being curious in the sense of picking up challenges as they come along, as living life as things come along. And so my first job in Edinburgh, I mean, I was doing consulting, not because I decided to do consulting, but because I was 16, I decided to say fuck off to everyone. I moved to Edinburgh and I was studying. I needed a job. I wanted to learn more things. I had to survive somehow. I was there on my own. Nobody's giving me anything. I needed to survive. So you could say I looked for the first job I could find, but still I was very picky. I could have been working at a restaurant. That would have been the most common thing. I ended up in this very small company making software and talking to customers and making e-commerce websites. And it was like from the outside, you couldn't say how much was going on, but it was an eye-opening experience. And I learned a lot. I learned much more in 1 year at that company than I think I could have learned 5 years at Amazon. Because we did so much, there was so much to do. I had to touch so many pieces about to know how a business is run. And in fact, my only regret now is that I could have learned even more than that if back then I had the idea of saying, oh, well, maybe one day I want to run a business myself. Then I could have learned so much more from those people.
Like sales.
Like sales. They were my colleagues, they were incredibly good at sales. I learned quite a bit about talking to customers, for example, which I think most engineers don't have a clue how to do that. But in that time, I learned a lot how to talk to customers and solve real problems. And then from there to banking, I was also a bit attracted by the money because by then I was also starting to think, maybe I do want to do more at some point. But how do you do that? Well, you do need resources to do that. You do need money if you want to do cool things. It's just how I came to realize that just how our world works. And so I thought, maybe this is not and this can also be a good learning experience. which I think it was. And the challenges, yes, they were hardly technical challenges. That was not the point. But there is so much more than that. And so at least I could also see how bigger companies work. I also learned that was not for me.
That's when because I mean, you started the first entrepreneurial adventure was when you were doing, like, when you were in consulting, right? Consulting, when you were in banking, and with Skeeter, if I remember correctly,
Yes.
right? So
yes.
Tell me a bit more about Skeeter, and how does it fit to what you were saying? Because I think it fits, right?
Yes, definitely. I think, again, I was just waiting for the right opportunity to come up. There was one such opportunity, because it came to be in the proper way. It was how properly a startup should be set up. Because a friend's wife, who is a doctor, she was always struggling with all the bureaucracy they had to deal with, all the paperwork, and they were wasting more time on that. They were wasting more time on red tape than, actually looking after patients. Anyone from the outside, you would expect the doctor is spending the day looking at patients, but it turns out a good 2/3 of their time they're sitting in the office, writing the same boilerplate. At the same time, we knew that, or we learned, we started thinking more about that, and we were both software engineers. Also, with another friend was also software engineer, talking about that and say it's unbelievable that this is how software is used today. This is a pet peeve of mine. This is something that makes me irrationally angry whenever I see bad software that is actually making you waste more time than saving. I get really angry. Like, whoever built that thing, they should never let them touch a computer again. I cannot stand bad software, and I cannot stand when software is used to create more workload. Something I really hate. And so we were discussing that and looking at the tools they used and how poor those tools are, because they still use them. There must be a better alternative. And so back then, it's not the beginning, but let's say AI was starting to come up in the way we know it today. So the first very good speech-to-text models were coming up. The first very good wearable devices were being sold. And so we thought, okay, let's look at all the technology we know about today and how we can make that better. And we built Skeeter, which was actually quite simple. I mean, it was a mobile app. It was a smartwatch app. Record something, record a message, transcribe it, and adapt it to the medical context. We knew about units and anything you needed in this context. So it was built specifically for that niche, for that vertical. It was built with the feedback from my friend's wife we would build features, she would test them. She was also very direct, very transparent. Something was shit, we would get an audio message saying, hey, this is shit, this doesn't work, you're wasting my time. And this was perfect, because this is exactly how you build software that doesn't waste your time, that actually helps. And so we made this thing that we actually got more doctors to then try out. And we set up a company because we ran a paid trial. Actually got the money for that. For the first time we were really making money with our own product. So it was really, we were really on the right path. But it was also the time of COVID.
I see that.
Bad timing.
Yeah.
Bad timing. I mean, we were working with hospitals, but you could argue they had even more of a need to work efficiently. However, they also had less money because they had many things to think of. And this was not so much of a priority. We underestimated sales. It's really hard to sell to a huge hospital. Underestimated that.
No, I don't believe you.
We should have probably maybe gone a different path. We also underestimated the amount of time and dedication that this needs. Because we managed to take it this far while we still had a full-time job. We all had a full-time job. It was a team of 5. We all had a full-time job. We did all these things. Everything I said so far, we did in our free time, working nights and weekends, and taking days off to go and meet the client. But I do have to say that in hindsight, we were this far. We were really, really so close and making it happen.
What would you have done differently?
That's also hard to say. I think everything we did was right up to that point. Everything we did was right because we had gotten to that point where we had a working product that our users loved, and we did get a paid trial. Somebody paid to actually test it. We should have kept going. At that point, we were already burnt out. We were not ready. Probably we were not ready for it. In a way, I feel like if we had done more before that, if we had more experience before that, when we came to that point, we would have known. We would have known it was not time to abandon ship. We were not sinking. We were actually going. But we were so scared and so burnt out that we just thought, look, this is not going anywhere. It was enough to get one no at that point to think, actually, this is not going to fly. Because we didn't have enough experience. So, well, what should have done differently is we probably should have kept going at that point. But we just, we couldn't see it. We needed capital as well. That was another mistake. We needed a lot of capital at that point to make it work. I mean, a lot. It's not even that much. But that would have been the time to raise some seed funding, given the kind of project. And again, looking at it in hindsight, with what I learned after that, I would say also what I learned at Yekati, which I think it was also a learning experience. That was the time to raise seed funding, and it was the time to find the right investors. And I think we looked for all the wrong investors. And the right investors would have been, if anyone wants to do it now, just copy my idea and do that, a bunch of doctors. We could have found 15 doctors. They had their mind blown by that product. They really loved Skeeter. The problem we had back then was the doctors loved it, but management would not understand. And we needed allies in the hospital to make that fly. Now, of course, conflict of interest and all that stuff, it's more complicated than it sounds, but we could have gotten seed funding, a bunch of angel investors, do that full time for a year. And at that point, with everything that changed then with AI, I mean, now it's actually too late. Now it would be bad timing to do that because now the market is flooded with solutions in that space. Now it is indeed only a sales problem. Now it's only a matter of going and selling the right solution, and somebody's going to come and eat all the old cake. So yes, it's many things. Well, the timing was also not perfect again because COVID. But yeah, it was a learning experience.
I mean, while you were talking, you were talking about, for example, Yekati. So you had additional entrepreneurial opportunities even before starting Sealambda, and can you talk a bit more about that? So and look back and what you have done differently, even the question that I asked you before in Skeeter, but even the other opportunities that you had. Can you elaborate a bit? What also there? Well, do you see similarity? Why it didn't work? Do you see that maybe you learned something more? You learned something even more, even different that you didn't before that?
Yes, I think it also goes back to that matter of opportunities, catching what happens, right? You see something happening and you say, okay, what do I do next? And it's everything about timing. So at that point, when we realized, or rather we decided that Skitter was failing, even though turns out it was not. At that time when we abandoned Skitter, I was looking for whatever I wanted to do next. So I had actually many opportunities at that point. I had the opportunity of working at AWS and Datadog. And then another couple of startups. One was really just starting out at that point. Well, both were starting out. But then Yekati came up. Like some friends came along. I mean, also you, Mauro, came along because you were also trying to decide if that was going to be your next step. And in a way, one thing that kind of convinced me, probably because we were suffering that so much at Skitter, and I didn't realize the true importance of that. But to me, I look at Yekati, which the founders managed to get good funding. And so I saw that as a validation. Basically, I look at that and say, well, if they managed to raise so much money to get started, then it must be a good idea. If they've got so much money to make it run, then one way or another, it's definitely going to work out. Because we were suffering that at Skitter, where we said, look, if we were unable to raise money, then probably it was not such a good idea. And at that point back then, I didn't realize that there is no correlation between the two. It's not like good ideas raise capital and bad ideas don't. What I didn't realize back then, it was that Skitter had a very clear business plan. It solved a burning problem. There was somebody willing to pay on the other end to solve that problem. Although it was a hard problem although it was hard to actually sell to those people. That was a challenge. But there was a clear business. Whereas Yekati, I looked at the wrong KPI, I think. I looked at the wrong indicator saying, they raise capital, then it must be set for success. But it turns out it was a startup like any other. So yes, you managed to find funding. Yes, you have something that looks like a very good idea. It looks like a good product. But then if at some point, in one way or another, you don't figure out a way to actually make money, then it won't go anywhere. Which is why in the end, yes, I still consider it a success because we learned a lot. And yes, Yekati was bought at least for the technology. So I think we built some cool stuff. So it was fun in a way, but it was also mostly a learning experience in saying, startup really needs to be solving a problem. If you're not actually solving a problem, but rather building some technology for the sake of it, you're not really going anywhere. Or maybe you can. I mean, there are, of course, startups also, maybe university spin-offs. They just find some cool technology and try to apply it to something. But maybe it's not for me, after all. It also goes back to what we were asking earlier about challenges. What do I find challenging? To me, something challenging is not building something for the sake of it. It's not coming up with some crazy new mathematical theorem that nobody's thought about before. That is not challenging for me. Can be fun, it can be a puzzle, but I won't spend my life doing that. That's why I cannot see myself spending my life doing that. What is challenging for me is looking at a real problem and finding an effective solution. That's something that I find challenging, and that's something that I find thrilling to do, because when I find that's where I get my best dopamine shots. I see a problem, I solve it in an efficient way. That's what makes me happy. And so that's also why C-Lambda, I think the way we are building now, looking for problems and solving those problems, I find that relatable. This is how I like to build things.
Now that you mentioned C-Lambda, let's go to it. So we left Yekati, and then we decided to start C-Lambda. Many people are unable to pronounce, especially the ones in Spain, to pronounce the name. and they're a bit also confused. Sometimes they tell me they're confused because it's like, yeah, on one side I see that you are Sealanda, on the other side that you are Bootstrap for Cash. So where is this name or these names coming from?
Okay, the next learning is we need to also be better at marketing. This is another thing we are learning, or we are trying to learn since we started Sealanda. And so, yeah, we just need to present it better.
Mhm.
But if anyone is listening to this now, Bootstrap for Cash is the podcast you're listening to now. And it's a pun. I like to make puns, like dead jokes. Being strapped for cash means you are lacking money, which we are, because we are bootstrapping the company. And bootstrapping a company means, or it comes from the saying, to pull oneself up from their own bootstraps. So you pull your boots and you lift yourself, which obviously doesn't work. Unless you have something to do some leverage on. And Sealanda is also a random thing. Actually, it's a domain name I bought a long time ago because I was once skiing and on a lift I saw a drawing of a sea lion, or at least it looked like a sea lion, in the shape of a lambda. Somebody was doing some graffiti and draw this very cool logo, which I then tried to turn into the logo of Sealanda now. And so it was a sea lion, or a seal, maybe, in the shape of a lambda. That's what the name is come from.
Apart that we are not good at marketing and that we need to improve a lot, what else have you learned since we started Sealanda 1 year ago?
Again, this would also be many things, but I would say the most important is really focusing on real problems. That's the key point of running a business. I think it's as simple as that.
Right now we are doing a podcast, right? And we were like, now over the weekend we were there in Como, and below the sunshine and between the streets of Como and close to the lake, and having a drink in front and some appetizer. We were doing even a podcast there,
which is coming next week, by the way.
So, I mean, there it was something special because we've done podcasts together, and most of the time we're just in front of our computer in a room and so forth. And that was a special setting. But do you like being a podcaster? Being in Como, it's one thing, and doing it in a small office in front of the computer with the neon light and stuff like that. Do you like it? Would you even recommend it to other entrepreneurs?
And I want to add one small addition.
Yeah.
During our stay in Como, the idea or the plan for Como was to bring all our material like camera and microphones and so on to do this podcast episode in person in Como. But it didn't happen for several reasons, and we had to improvise, and that's why we get this episode next week. It's actually quite a special episode because it's a new format. Let's see how it works. But there is some stress added to it. Like you plan something, you bring all your stuff, things don't work out. So it's not only having apero in Como and bring out some microphones and start asking questions, right? There is some preparation.
Yeah, definitely. I think it goes back to that thing of trying new things and seeing what works and see where you see a return and stick to it. I do enjoy the feedback that we get also from the podcast. So, yes, once again, if you are listening and want to send us an email, send us a message or leave a comment, that is really appreciated. I really like getting that feedback, which is something that, for example, that makes me enjoy doing the podcast. Obviously, it is more work. So it is yet another thing that we need to be doing. We need to then edit it. We need to prepare the shorts to promote it. And I really struggle with that part, with the promotion part. I really struggle with being on social media, and that part I find hard. So it's also one of the challenges, I think, since we started C Lambda. Social media nowadays, whenever you're trying to be noticed, it's a given. You have to be there. Years ago, you just needed to set up a shop in the right place. Now, this is how you get your business known. So this is a way that I find doable. I like the podcast because it's something I manage to do somehow. I like that it's always at least the two of us. So you cannot procrastinate. We've got the deadline and we do it and we get it done. So I like it, and I will keep doing that. Because in a similar note, I also have been saying this since a long time, and I want to start a YouTube channel with a different focus, with a specific idea and audience in mind. But somehow I've been procrastinating more and more, and I've been trying to read about the right things and look at the various options, and I did get myself a bit in that analysis paralysis mode I was talking about earlier. So sometimes that side of me does come out and bites me and gets me stuck. So I've been trying to get that running, but I still haven't managed to. Whereas the podcast, with all the challenges that come along with it, with all the changes in schedule and new ideas and new formats, but we have our deadline. We are doing it. We get the feedback, so we see there is some value in it. Obviously, I think we wouldn't do it if we saw no value in it at some point. So we see there is some value that it is growing, and so I'm very happy to stick to that for that reason. And whether somebody else should do it, I think it goes to the podcast or the YouTube channel or whatever other type of social media. I think, well, you need to find a way to get in touch with people. That is the vital part. I think it's even more relevant now. We're always talking about now AI and will it kill work? Will it kill sales? Is it going to kill marketing or coding? Or it doesn't matter so much because it's just a tool. And it is not the tool that it is going to kill the human relationship. It may help in different ways, but I think that in the end it all goes down to the basics of knowing how to connect with other humans. And in the end, this is what marketing, sales, and even coding, even making software, fundamentally is about connecting with other humans. Because if you cannot connect with humans, you cannot have the empathy to understand the problem, which is what we were saying from the beginning. If you cannot empathize with others and understand why they're struggling, why fundamentally they need technology to help them, then you cannot build good technology. You cannot make software for the sake of making software. You need to connect with humans, understand the problems, and then you can find solutions. So is it YouTube? Is it Spotify? Is it Reddit? Whatever. It's just a great way to connect with people. So yes, I would keep on doing that. And in fact, I need to find ways to do it even more.
I personally like the idea when we were in Como. If you remember, we had to ask everyone around to participate in our podcast in a very improvised way. Mauro was the first one saying, let's go. He's already a natural. But the rest were quite reluctant, right? Especially his wife and our friend Angelo. They were kind of like, no, a podcast, why? No, I'm not prepared. And, it's this kind of unknown. It was challenging them a lot, right? But then they participated. We managed to convince them, and they loved it, especially Angelo. But now Mauro bought even microphones, so his wife could start her own podcast maybe. So we could say that this is somehow we are inspiring in a way people, right? And for me, that has no value, right? For me, it's great to feel that other people might be successful at some point with their own podcast because we triggered that incentive, right? When they were quite reluctant to do it at the beginning. So for me, if your wife Mauro is successful with her podcast and our podcast goes shit, I will be very happy. Really, really,
Yeah.
I mean it.
Yeah, I know.
And the second thing I wanted to mention is a challenge for you, Giorgio, for your YouTube channel. Let's do something if you agree. And Mauro is here as a witness. Let's put a deadline. And if you don't publish your first video by that deadline, you invite Mauro and me to a steakhouse in Zurich. And of course, you need to pay your hotel to stay the night. So that's quite some money. So let's put a deadline here with all our listeners listening. So today is 23rd of September, 2025. What do you think is a good deadline?
It must be before 2 weeks, because I get into wisdom teeth pulled on the 7th of October, and I don't know how long I'm going to be struggling to talk, so it must be before the 7th.
So next week.
Well, next week sounds a bit challenging. Let's say the 7th. Give me 2 weeks.
Okay, good.
I mean, that's a typical case of I don't know if I say correctly, but negative reinforcement instead of positive reinforcement. Or you see what I'm trying to say? We should come up with something that forces Giorgio to do the YouTube
I mean,
channel.
in a way, I would very much enjoy having the steak with you guys. So
that's a positive.
It's not that good.
It's a.
However, trying to run this thing and not having a salary for a year doesn't help. So
Yeah.
So I'll find a way. I'll find a way.
Okay, let's stay here in front of our listeners and Mauro. If you by the 7th of October 2025 you don't have a video published in your new YouTube channel, you need to invite Mauro and me to a very expensive steakhouse in Zurich. Is that fine?
Sounds like a plan. Let's do it.
Perfect. Good. So you talk about not having a salary. That's the next question I'm going to ask you, right? And I actually wanted to ask you in private during our stay in Como, because you are a very private person. So I always need to ask you, how are you doing? Because you won't say shit otherwise. And so how are you coping with such an uncertainty and the stress of not having a salary? How do you wake up every morning with the motivation to keep moving?
Well, the motivation to keep moving is obviously so that we can get a salary. So the motivation is a very strong pull. And I think it was, again, as I said before, it was a mistake with Skeeter that we did not have that pull. So that blocks you. Or at least you do not put in 100%. We did put in a lot, actually, but the money was not enough. But also it helps you be very focused. So you know what matters. And I guess it is a vital part of it. I think it's really a crucial part of setting up a profitable business. I'm beginning to think that without this phase, I don't think we would be effective in setting up something successful. So you need that struggle. You need this part where you are actually risking something. You need to have that risk. I mean, what is the risk of doing business? This is the risk of doing business. It must exist. You cannot set up a business if you don't face any risk.
Question there, because when you were doing Skeeter, it was also like you had this stress because you were working 100% and you were throwing out like time with your family, with your friends, just to do that. And even your time, because you took days off work. I mean, that is also quite stress, and you were quite effective. Now, the question then poses itself like almost like, do you have more stress now, or you had more stress there?
I believe it may have been a different kind of stress. I was more burnt out then, which maybe doesn't help either.
Yeah.
Actually, it definitely doesn't help either.
Yeah. Because at some point, I mean, right now, it's like, of course, you don't have a salary, but somehow with like side income and so forth, you survive. Do you think that is it enough of a stress to really like being creative? Because also stress could be also counterproductive with creativeness. I mean, I don't know, it's just a speculation of mine. I'm not a psychiatrist, as a psychologist who knows exactly what triggers creativity. But they always say if you have a lot of like noise, you cannot concentrate. Or you cannot concentrate, you cannot like spur with creativity. Although also like Ivan is a Spaniard, and Spaniard, they always say they're very creative because they just don't have resources and they need to survive in some way or the other, and that fosters creativity. Sorry for being too like philosophically about that, but what's your take on that?
I think it's a common argument for funding, like companies raising capital. I think it makes sense out to a certain point. As in, I'm not even against ourselves raising capital when it makes sense, because it's true that if you need to be in it for the long run, and at some point you don't want fear to take over you.
Mhm.
So of course, at some point, you need to have your basic needs met. So far, the way it's been, and again, why I think it's crucial that at least one gets started this way. I said before, I've been saving and living in a way, having a certain lifestyle that makes it feasible to start this, to do this. Because I knew at some point I wanted to do this. I think this is all in preparation to make this run. And again, it's not even so much about well, yeah, you could say it has to do with creativity, but also good engineering. Also, good engineering works like that. You operate within certain constraints. Working this way, time is a constraint. You've got deadlines. You've got a certain amount of time until you want to make this work. So, is stress preventing creativity? Well, it's focusing it. Because of course, it would be nice to be very creative and spend time making things, but that's usually what maybe an artist is doing. Actually, probably doesn't even happen so much anymore, but sometimes it does. Like, you got artists having a patron, so they don't have to worry about anything, so they can use all their brain power to do creative things. They're not necessarily solving a problem per se. That's not the engineering attitude, which is rather solving a problem within a set of constraints. It's nice sometimes to dream about crazy things, but then when you need to get them done, you need to operate within those constraints. And so there must be a balance again, and I think it's also something that can shift over time. If initially you cannot get up and running within certain constraints, what are you even dreaming about? Like, what all that creativity, what is that pursuing? I think this may have been, what I said before, a mistake of Yekati. Starting without those constraints, you get to the point where you're dreaming about things that are not going to happen because you completely ignore the constraints. At some point, they come back and bite you, though. If you start the other way around, you face the constraints first and say, okay, I can only do so much. I only have so much time. I only have so much resources. So I can do this. I managed to make it work within those constraints. Then I can prove I can dream bigger. Then maybe I can prove I can bring in more resources. Now I can bring in more money somehow, either because it's profitable or because you raise some capital. And I think investors would also be more willing to give money to somebody who could prove that within certain constraints, they could actually be effective. And then you can scale it.
Last question. Are you ready? I want you to be honest, 100% honest here. and don't try to sell me positive bullshit that you don't believe in. But do you think we will manage to make C Lambda a profitable business?
I think we will do one of these two things. Yeah, either we make it profitable or we get to the point where we raise some funding. I see those two options right now.
Yeah, but raising funding doesn't mean profitable, right? You can still go bankrupt.
No, exactly. So, do you think we'll manage? Maybe not. But I think we'll get to the place where we could at least raise funding. Whether we manage to make it profitable, it's 50-50. It's really hard to say now.
So I have another last question. Sorry. With everything that is happening, and we talk about it already in our podcast with actually Mauro and other people about the future of AI and so on. Even if C Lambda doesn't work out, do you see it like an investment to be future-proof, considering this trend saying that AI will take over everything and then there will be less jobs and many people will be jobless because of that? What do you think? Will you be more prepared for the market in the future compared to people working currently in corporate?
I think so. Yes. I think the skills, again, that you need to learn to operate as a business, everything we mentioned so far, sales, marketing, social media, and solving problems and connecting with humans and understanding the problems, all these things are here to stay. There is no AI now or in 50 years that is going to solve those problems. Will there be a bunch of tools that help? Definitely. And I think that has also helped the way the privilege we have now, also of the testing things and prototyping. We have learned so much also about these new tools. So yes, it was a very valuable experience in any case. One way or another, this was an incredibly useful experience.
So would you recommend it to someone else out there not being happy with their job currently?
Well, I would say, do consider it. But of course, make some good plans. Do it in a reasonable way. But do consider it.
Okay. Thank you, Giorgio, for your time, for your podcast.
Thank you.
And thank you, Mauro.
Thank you. Thank you, guys.
And yeah, hear you next week.